Hey everybody. I have said plenty of times in the past that when you do water changes, you may be doing more of a water change than you think you're doing, and that's because the volume of water our tanks holds is seldom the actual amount the volume of tank is called. And today we're going to look at a few 10-gallon tanks and we're going to see how they don't actually hold 10 gallons at all. Now, I'm not sure about a completely empty tank, but my theory is that the 10 gallons represents the total volume of space that the exterior measurements of the tank would take up. In other words, if a 10-gallon aquarium was a solid block and you submerged it in water, that whole entire thing would displace 10 gallons of water. That's not the same as holding 10 gallons of water. So when we look at an aquarium, we have to think about how much other stuff is inside the tank as well. Whether you've got substrate or plants, rocks, woodwork, even the fish themselves take up space inside that tank. And that space is space where there's no water. So if we look at my deep sand bed tank, we can see that it's got a whole lot of gravel in the bottom of it. And while this is a 20-gallon tank, it's still clearly not holding 20 gallons. And then if you look at the rocks and the woodwork and everything in there, that's taking up an awful lot of space. And then of course, if we look at my experimental deep sand bed tank, there we go. If we look at that, and we can clearly see that it's half full of sand. So even if this tank did hold 10 gallons of water, it no longer holds anywhere near 10 gallons of water. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to do a 5-gallon water change on my quarantine tank, which is almost empty. It's got one piece of wood and one rock in the bottom of it, and otherwise it's just a bare bottom tank. So not a whole lot of volume being offset by the rock and the woodwork. And of course the tank is topped off to a reasonable level. We can't top them off all the way to the very top. So we're going to pull 10 gallon or 5 gallons of water out of this 10-gallon tank, and we're going to see if the level of water is not halfway down the tank, or is it a lot more than that, because I suspect we're going to be pulling a lot more than half the amount of water out of there when we pull 5 gallons out. So let's have a look. Alright everybody, you can see I got 2 little rocks on the bottom and 1 piece of wood. I've actually drawn a line with Sharpie right at the halfway point in the tank. I hope that's coming out on camera. If not, I will certainly make it clear once we get down to that point. So I'm just running this into a 5-gallon bucket, and I think rather than filling the 5-gallon bucket all the way up, which I believe would drain an awful lot of this tank out, I don't want to do that much of a water change. I think what we're going to do instead is just drain it down until we get to that line at the halfway point, and then we'll have a look at how much is actually in the bucket. And I'm sure it's not going to be a full 5-gallon bucket. If you're not familiar with what I'm using to do this water change, this is a liquid transfer pump, and it comes in really handy for doing water changes on these lower tanks where it's hard to get a good siphon going when you're trying to just use a regular gravel vac or something. So the impeller is all the way down at the very intake end, so if you suck up any gravel with it, it will jam up fairly easily. So it's really only good for doing basic water changes. I wouldn't really try to get a lot of mulm and stuff out of there, but if you've got a bare glass tank like this and you don't have any gravel in it, it actually does a really good job of sucking up the loose mulm and other stuff to actually do some basic tank maintenance. Again, any little bits of grit or anything gets stuck in there and it gets jammed up pretty easily. In fact, I got some little bit of root stuck in there now, and I think that might give me some problem, but we'll see. And it also functions like a siphon, so even if the impeller gets jammed up, the water will still just continue to flow through it once you get the flow going. So I'll put a link down below to the little liquid transfer pump if you're interested in that. But we are just now coming about down to that halfway mark. And we've definitely got a reduced flow, so I must have sucked up some plant material or whatever, and it's binding up in the impeller. So that's it right there. That is our halfway mark. And if we have a look at what's in the bucket, you can see it's nowhere near full. I could probably put another gallon in that, maybe 3/4 of a gallon, possibly. In fact, let's actually top that off. Oh, you know what? My battery's about to die, so we're not going to do that. We're going to call that the end of this video. So there you go. That was just a little visual demonstration of the fact that you get far less than 10 gallons of water in a 10-gallon tank. So that's just something to be thoughtful of when you're doing your next water change, especially if you've got a lot of substrate and decorations and plants and everything else in your aquarium. That takes up a lot of space that would otherwise be holding water. So when you're adding medication or you're thinking about dosing salts or anything else, think more realistically about how much water is actually in your aquarium. So there you go, everybody. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you real soon in the next one.